Thanks for tuning in to Author Summaries. Today we have Charlie Gilkey, author of Start Finishing. So welcome.
Dave, thanks so much for having me today. I'm really excited about this. Start finishing is a bit of back catalog for me, but it's still I love it so much. So I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome, awesome. And just for the record, let me pull up my Audible library, and I have Team Habits is the next one up. But I want
Nice.
to stick with this one because this one helped me personally so much. I bought it when it came out and just devoured it. I always mention to everybody that, to me, like, this is not a book you're reading. This is like a course you're studying. So
I love it. I love
every
it.
page is, highlighted, notes, torn about. And then you offer all the free resources and everything. And I didn't realize till recently the doorbell might actually ring and Amazon's gonna be delivering. I didn't realize you had a workbook to go with it. So I'm super excited about that and stuff. But yeah, Start Finishing, I mean, just like the title says, and it's helped me so much. So if you don't mind, like, tell a little bit about how you kind of got into this and why you wrote this one.
So it's 2024. So I started doing this in 2007, and at the time I started doing what became Productive Flourishing, which is the website that I write all my work at. I was simultaneously completing or working towards completing my PhD in philosophy. And I was also doing a lot of active duty for special work and active duty for training work for the United States Army. So I'm an Army logistician, and helping people with that front. So I came across that very human pattern of too many ideas, not enough time. Too many ideas, not enough time. But I also had too many responsibilities for, being a graduate student and teaching, being a husband, trying to get, my house in order, literally, because, everything with that, and then just all the things. So I did what any good scholar and officer would do. And I was like, I'm not the only person that has this problem. Other people have figured this out. And so I read, the classics of that time and period. So the Seven Habits and the Getting Things Done and, like, all of those books that were in that sort of mid 90s, early 2000s crop of productivity books, right? And while I liked a lot of them, um, I found myself having to translate a lot of them because they weren't really written for creative knowledge workers, and I didn't feel that they were really written for people whose livelihood depended upon shipping ideas. And so I found the productivity literature far too granular, like to-do list and things like that. And that's no disrespect, but just for my purposes at the time, didn't work for me. And then I found the personal development literature um too principle value focus. And I realized that my problem was this messy world of projects, like this middle ground. I needed to complete a lot of month size, quarter size, half year size projects to advance my career, both of them. And not a lot of books talked about that. And
Yeah.
so I didn't realize it as I was writing it. That's what I figured out later is that, oh, this is really about getting projects that matter done. And as I continue to write about that, the website became Productive Flourishing. It's important to me that productive modifies flourishing. And I say that because so many people just focused on the productivity to get more things done to the extent of either they're not thriving or they're not doing their real deep work. And so, given that that's when I was writing at the time, like late 2000s or so, the productivity component of my work actually is what took off and went viral.
You've been listening to Author Summaries with Dave Streen, sponsored by WeHelpAuthors.com.
Looking back in time, like, I've been writing about leadership since then. I've been writing about teamwork since then. I've been writing about entrepreneurship since then, but that's what took out because that's where we were in the internet at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's where, Start Finishing is actually my second book, but it's my first traditionally published book.
Okay.
Um, so I ended up writing this book because, one, after writing about it for 10 years on the web, um, it kind of got dumb not having a book that codified all of the stuff that I'd been written and took people through a convenient um, beginning, middle, and end. So that's piece one. But piece two is I was also at the point And Dave, you'll get it because you do author summaries, where it's like someone would ask me a question and I'll be like, so read these 4 posts and then go read this other book, but only chapter 2 or 3, but then read this other book and it's chapter 7 that's the gem. And I'm like, this is hard. Why am
Yeah,
I doing this? Right. Let's put it all together.
nice.
And that's what start finishing became.
Awesome, awesome. And that, one of the lines in your book, you said, "Rocking your to-do list displaces doing your best work," and that's what you just talked about a little bit about, I call it busyness instead of business.
Hmm.
A lot of us knock off the easy things to do, and we never get to the important stuff because there's never gonna be an end to those little easy tasks we can put on our to-do list that we feel good knocking off, and we just delay our best work, and I'm so guilty of that myself, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that, the shiny object syndrome.
Yeah, I think it's multiple things going on with that. One is it's the mistaken view that motion equals progress, right? And so we think that if we're checking off those to-do lists, like we're actually getting somewhere. But then we become like the rocking chair that does a lot of moving but doesn't get anywhere, right? So that's the first sort of convenient sort of thing. Um, the inconvenient truths about the scenario is two, I think most of us haven't really grappled with how technology has changed the way we focus or can't. And so there's a little bit of that going on. But I think the most inconvenient truth is one of the reasons we avoid doing our best work and fall into just getting down the to-do list is our best work requires courage, right? And it requires us doing something that might not work, but it's worth doing anyways. It requires doing something we haven't done it before. And it sucks to suck. And so most of us don't want to do things we're not good at. So we stick to the known, the easy work, the things that we're good at, the things that's going to get a certain result. And then 3 months, 6 months later, wonder why we're getting the same damn result. Well, because we've been doing the same thing the same way.
Yeah.
And so that's the hard part. A lot of times when I really get into the work, I'm really encouraging people to do things like, start a podcast and reach out to folks you don't know and have that conversation with, or whatever that is, so that we grow.
Yeah, yeah. That reminds me, your line in there, the more that the idea matters to you, the more you'll thrash precisely because its success or failure is so deeply important to us. And that just resonated with me that I realized, like, and I know this about myself, like at this age, I self-sabotage. I get, to that right up to that point. I always use like the story, my daughter was real young at the time, was playing soccer and she got kicked in the eye and black eye, and she brushed it off, got right back in there, and she was always the fastest to the ball and everything. Well, same thing happened. She got knocked over, kicked in the other eye. So she had two black eyes at the time. And it changed her whole soccer career to where she'd still be the fastest to the ball, but about 4 feet away from it, she'd just put on the brakes and let somebody else get it because she didn't want to get kicked in the face again. And I tend to do that with business a lot of times. And I'll laugh and recognize that I'm doing that. I get right up to that point that really matters and just go off and do the next thing or something else. I'll just put stuff in front of it. And I laugh at myself that I know I'm doing it. And I still need to, like you talked about in the book, the red zone, gets,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that point, I think part of it is um, we start making failure a character trait and not an event. Right. And so if you get right up to the edge of it, and you're like, oh, it might not work. And what if it fails? And then if it fails, then it says something important about me. But if you're in entrepreneurship, most of what you're doing is going to fail. Right.
yeah,
It's part of the whole earlier stage of your entrepreneurial journey is just doing a bunch of stuff that doesn't work so you can get it out of the way to figure out what actually does work for you. And that trips a lot of people up, especially if they were high performers are really high achievers in a corporate job or in any other job where they're really good. They got high levels of mastery. And wait a second, you're telling me, Charlie, that I have to start this business and like not be good at it and have to fail a lot and have to like put myself in a position to where I don't know what I'm doing and I can look like an idiot. Also, I may not be able to pay my bills. Yeah, no, I'm gonna opt out on that one. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what we do. That's what keeps people who would be fantastic creators and entrepreneurs in a job, because when they do that, it's like, you need to know what, that's hard. I don't want to do that. I'm going to stay over here, but I'm going to pine about that other thing over there. Right.
Yeah.
Or it keeps people who get out and have their first initial successes, and they're like, okay, this is the safe known world for me. So I'm going to stay here. And what I want to be clear about this, we might talk about the air sandwich. I am
For
actually
sure.
not about either shaming or judging folks who consciously or unconsciously decide that my priorities are financial stability. Right. That's what's important to me. I've got kids that are going through school. I want to make sure I have their college. Like, I don't have or want to be out there in the entrepreneurial world where it's riskier. Or I value stability and consistency in my job more than I value this. Or other, like, I want to contain my job so that it's like I do 6 to 7 hours, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and then I go home. Right. And then I do other stuff that I'm interested in. If those are all choices for you, fantastic, great. And I'm not trying to say that in like a good for you way. Like, no, those are your actual values. Own that. But also understand that that precludes, like, stop reading the books on entrepreneurship, right? Stop going through those little fantasies that you're going to do that, because it doesn't align with your values, and that's okay, right? However, on the flip side of it is, if you know that your values line you up to be more entrepreneurial, to start your own thing, so on and so forth, you got to own that too. Because if you're in a job that doesn't allow for those, you're going to be miserable, and it will eventually catch up to you, right? You'll blow something up. You'll, go through all the sort of self harming ways, because fundamentally, the job that's safe and secure, that puts money on the table, like, all those things are important, but there's no soul in it for you, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the courage that I would have you have there, like, both of these are about courage, right? So the first one, where entrepreneurship's not for you, is the courage to be yourself and own that, and understand that that's not being less than. On the entrepreneur side, it's also the courage to be yourself, and understand that that's going to come with risk and volatility. And you're going to have a lot of conversations with those of you, with the people around you, about how to make that work. Right. But don't phone it in and not be yourself just to have the job over here. Cause life is super short, turns out.
Yeah.
Right. And while work isn't the end all be all, a lot of us spend a lot of time at and around work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the more that we can make that better, the more that we can make that fulfilling, typically, the more we'll thrive in our life.
That we'll jump around through the book and stuff, but that made me think about scheduling and stuff. And I've realized I'm never a guy to schedule. I'm terrible with calendars and everything else, but um, I've learned that when I do use a calendar, I'm just putting the business stuff in. And then maybe I'll sprinkle in the leftovers to family or friends or fun or rejuvenation and stuff. And I've learned, and your book talks about this, like, you got to schedule the rejuvenation first, and you'll find time for the work. Schedule the most important things first, which would probably be your family, your friends, doing rejuvenating things. So you are sharp when you are working and stuff. But almost nobody that I talk to does it that way. So that was a really good, flip the script and put make a list of what really matters to you and fill those into the calendar first, give them the prime you, and then, work's always going to find a way to get done, especially when you're like I am, just serial entrepreneur, like, you know, which that's another thing that I want to make sure we get to is you have a lot of great advice on turning it off, because like I work from home. It's very easy for me to carry my laptop into the other room and not be present, with my family and just keep working and stuff. When even if I don't bring the laptop in, the wheels are always turning and stuff. So you have some good ways of saying, hey, the workday's done, and following the steps to actually let your mind turn off and say, yes, the workday's done. I did a good job, and tomorrow's another day. So that's beneficial for every entrepreneur. You've been listening to the Author Summaries podcast with Dave Streen. Sponsored by WeHelpAuthors.com. Check them out.
Yeah, I mean, it turns out that most studies in productivity and work management and things like that point out that after about 36 hours of work a week, depending upon how one does, and you structure a lot of different ways, but that's sort of the most really productive work we're going to do. Um, and so most people, especially their entrepreneurs, listening to this are like, but yeah, nah, Charlie, nah, I'm working 10 to 12 hours a day, man. I got to grind, I got to hustle. But when you actually do a time log with them and you say, hey, how much of that was actually really productive time? Like, where you actually push something forward. I'm not talking about that time where you're like just on social media for 2 hours, just lurking and refreshing. I'm not talking about that because we know that's not really useful, right? But when you look at their actual getting stuff done, driving projects forward, creating value, you find out that it's about 35 to 36 hours a week,
Yeah, I think
right?
that I,
Do what? And it's high to your
if I
point.
was,
It's
yeah, if I was truly grading myself on how much of the day I'm doing the really hard, really productive, really the stuff that matters, it might be an hour or two. But if I do that hour or two, I'm almost wiped out. Like I've left it all on the court
yeah,
because it was really hard. Um, there's that second level of thinking, like, there's the knee-jerk reaction stuff that we just make a decision or whatever. And then there's stuff that really matters. And we have to really think through it and pound through it and stuff. And, I mean, that some decisions take 3 seconds and some could take 3 weeks, and so
yeah. Well, and this is where, you sort of started this talking about calendaring. I actually start with time blocking as a way for
yeah,
people to think about this, where, there are 4 different blocks of time. So I'll go through this. I do discuss this in the book, also on the website. But so the first that I want to focus on are focus blocks, which are 90 to 120-minute blocks of time. And this is this is where you really hunker down and you get it done. If you're familiar with Cal Newport's work, it's your deep working blocks, it's your deep thinking blocks. If it's not sort of thinky work, it's like I always give the example of like pick that room in your house where stuff hoards and just sort of accretes and then sort of builds up. Well, the reason that buildup happens is because those things that build up there don't have a home elsewhere, right? So it becomes their temporary home. But for you to figure out where their home is requires you to actually like move stuff around and think about it. That's actually a focus block too, right? Because you can't like really like 10% organize a room, right? And everyone knows what I'm talking about on that.
yeah, yeah.
So focus blocks, 90 to 120 blocks of time. The other thing I'll say about that is it's not 90 to 120 minutes where you're just like looking at the screen and typing words. Like you can go to the bathroom, you can like stand up, you can move around, you can change your music. You can do some of those, but if you switch to a different type of project or you switch to a different context, that's when you break it. Now, why 90 to 120 minutes? Our bodies work on circadian cycles. It turns out after about that long, most of our bodies will need to refresh anyways. But the other reason is most of us, when we're talking about creative work or knowledge work, we know that there's a certain amount of ramp up time to get into it, right? And we know there's a certain sort of ramp out time or build out time where this is where if you try to schedule super important work to get done in 30 minutes, most of the time you'll rebel and not do it. And you're like, oh, I'm just not being productive. It's like, no, there's a part of you that knows damn well that is going to take you 15 minutes to get into it and then 15 minutes to roll out of it. And like, if you have a meeting on the backside of that, your mind's already jumping to start to think about that meeting. So you need about that amount of time to get in there to make useful progress towards something. Now, I hung out here on the focus block side of things because this is the thing that enough entrepreneurs do not build into their schedule. They build in little mini admin blocks, which I'll talk about, but not a full focus block. Okay, so I'll go through the rest of them real quickly. A social block is what it sounds like. It's when you're meeting with other people. I also give them about a 90-minute period of time. And Dave's like, hey, Charlie, but most meetings are an hour. And I'm like, Dave, yes, the meeting is an hour, but the 15-minute of sort of transition to get ready for it, we got to account for that. And also the 50 minutes on the backside. So by the time you do it, it tends to be about 90 minutes. So those are social blocks. Third kind of block is an admin block. And that's what it sounds like. These are shorter. These are like the 15 to 30-minute blocks up to an hour, and it's enough for you to get in there and do something useful in admin without starting getting into like the click hole where you're jumping from email to Slack to social media to email to Slack to social media. Not really doing a whole lot, but just checking a lot. Um, and then the last one is one that I didn't teach when I started, but I learned the hard way that I needed to, which is the recovery block that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because time and time again, clients and students would fill their days full of focus blocks and admin blocks and social blocks because they were going to be productive. They were going to get it done. And I'm like, so like, where's lunch? Like, what are you doing to like actually recharge after those focus blocks? And so I had to put it in there as a forcing function because we were treating our bodies like head transportation vehicles. Like as long as our bodies just got our head wherever it needed to go, we were good to go. Turns out that doesn't make a good human and it doesn't make a good worker either, right? Um, what I typically find is that for best work projects, those super meaningful projects that you want to drive forward, it's 3 focus blocks per week per project. And I say that because a lot of people come to me and they'll be like, Charlie, I'm just not getting it done. I can't get right. I don't understand what's going on. And I'm going like, well, let's just start because I think we have a math problem. You're trying to do 5 projects a week. You have 2 focus blocks. That's a math problem, right? Um,
Yeah.
you can do at most one of those. And then there's some rebellion, like, no, I can do all of them. It's like, okay, talk to me in 2 weeks. And then they come back 2 weeks later. It's like, well, I wasn't able to get 4 or 5 of them done. I was hoping I only focus on that one. It's like, kind of told you that from the beginning. And I actually want to normalize that it's a math problem and not a character decision, executive functioning, any of those types of problems. Because if you just
Uh,
don't have the focus blocks, you're just not going to get it done.
yeah. And I like most of us overestimate or was it most of us overestimate what we can do in a day and underestimate what we can do in a year or a decade or something like that. It's really wild. We think we can, get so much done in a day and then, we're shocked when we don't. And like when you were saying the 3 focus blocks a couple of years ago, I would have thought, well, that's not enough. That's nothing. Now I'm like, wow, 3 focus blocks, that would really move the needle.
Absolutely. And the
It's
other thing that you mentioned here, before you start doing your creative thing, your entrepreneurial thing full time, you're probably used to more like a corporate schedule or more like a job schedule,
yeah,
which makes you think that, wow, if I just had a full day to do that thing that I loved, I would just crank all day. And typically you do that when you start. But turns out focus blocks and social blocks are pretty taxing. And after you've gotten in a groove and you've gotten over that sort of new project high, you'll be like, oh man, like I wrote all morning and I was wiped out for the rest of the day. Yeah,
yeah,
that's you and everybody else. That's not just like you're not uniquely defective in that way. Or you're like, oh man, like I had 4 great meetings with investors that day. And then like the next 2 or 3 days, I just couldn't get anything done. It's like, yeah, you were emotionally tired because you just had
yeah,
4 high stakes performance events that happened in a day.
yeah,
That is unusual for most people in a standard job, right? You might have one high performance standard or high performance event like a week. Think about it. Like really
yeah,
be serious. Like if you're presenting to the big boss and you got to do all that kind of whatnot, like how frequently does that happen? Where it's a high stakes performance event. Most work isn't like that.
yeah,
On the entrepreneurial side, every sales call, every investor meeting, when you're new to podcasting, all those types of things that you're doing new, they feel super high stakes. And that really drags at your energy. And so that's to your point, Dave, when I'm like, all right, so you're going, so if I'm working with a client or like, hey, I really want to do the podcasting thing. Basically, any time a client's like, I want to do a thing, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's thing, I'm like, okay, we need to figure out where we're going to find 15 to 20 hours a week to get this done. And everyone's like, no, that's not how long it takes, darling. Like, I've been doing this for a while. Right. If you want to get the reps in and get good at it and get some momentum, it's going to take that amount of time because it's not just I'll take podcasting since that's what we're doing. It's not just the time Dave and I are doing this, right? That Dave's prepared. He's done some things. I've done some things. There's the calendar stuff in between. There's what happens after this. Like he's going to do the show notes and then, I'll do something when there's all that sort of work I like to it. So this 1 hour or however long Dave lets me continue to talk to him, this one period of time has 2 to 3x other like amounts of time added to it
Yeah.
to get it done. If I were hosting a show and I wanted to have 2 guests a week or whatever that is, you can sort of backwards look at, oh crap, that's actually a lot of work to get that done. And I use that 15 or 20 hours as a litmus test about how committed to the project that they are. Because they're like, okay, Charlie, I can't do that. I've got 4 hours a week. I'm like, cool, 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 cool. Have you set your level of success and your expectations around success to match your level of investment in that success?
Mhm.
Because if you think you're going to be John Lee Dumas working 2 to 4 hours a week on a podcast, I have something to tell you. It will not work. Right. Um, and so I think that's what people don't do is they don't look at the level of success they're going after or that they want and then match their efforts to get there. I think we do this wishful thinking thing where it's like, I want to spend as little time on it and I only got a little bit, but I want the big results and that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And the bigger that gap, the more anxiety, more trouble we have and everything else. Like, and we, like Tony Robbins said, we should all over ourselves. I should be here. This should be doing this, and it's, yeah. So,
Absolutely. I mean, most of the time I'm needing to level set with clients, especially if it's on the client or even just entrepreneurs that are coming through my different programs, because they do shoot all over themselves. And they're like, well, I started this 8 years ago and I still like, I just been growing a little bit. I'm like, okay, cool, 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 cool. In those 8 years, how much time do you spend a week throughout the year, throughout those 8 years? And like, well, I've only been putting in a little bit of time because I'm like, well, okay. Like you're comparing yourself to someone who went all in on that one thing.
mhm.
And I sometimes have to remind entrepreneurs that every revenue stream in your business could actually be its own business. And that's important because they're like, well, I sold some products and then I started speaking and then I started doing some coaching and then like I did this other thing. And I'm like, so I started just counting up. I'm like, okay, so those are 4 different businesses that you could have had. There is some one person who decided to just do one of those things and put everything behind that one thing. And it turns out one of the people you're probably comparing yourself to is someone who did exactly that. Right. So you've tried to push 4 things forward with the same amount of capacity over time, and you don't get that cumulative buildup and momentum. That person decided to do the one thing and do it extremely well. And it's frustrating for so many of us entrepreneurs and creators because it's like that oaf that just does the one thing kind of mediocrely. Like it's not great, but they just focus on that one thing. Over time, they get great at that one thing, and then they start running laps around us with that one thing. And it's like, what do you mean?
Compound interest.
Like Charlie was like he's not that good, man. Like I was there when he started. Like it wasn't that, but Charlie did the one thing, right? And did it over 3 to 5 years. And now when you compare yourself to that person in that thing, you're looking at someone that's got a lot of those hours that you decided not to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. Yeah. I had an embarrassing moment. I was sitting in a meeting and then we were doing a tool and the exercise was, if you could focus down to just one thing, what would it be? And I came out with my answer really quick and I sat there, but there was a lot of time left on the clock. And I was like, oh, I know I'm going to do this 100%, but I could do this 100%. Oh, wait, there's only two, if I even add a second thing in, they're each getting 50-50 or 90-10. They're getting some split of it. It's taking me away from that one thing. And it's usually not one thing for me, it's 30, and so
Yeah. Yeah,
really,
because you got to think it's the math on that. Again, math problems.
mm,
Um, So if you had 100%, you don't have to do a lot of the prioritization and cross project management and deconflicting and all those different types of things you do because you just have the one thing. But when you divide it in two, it's not like you take that same amount of time. It's like, okay, it gets half the juice. Like project A gets half the juice, project B gets half the juice. No, 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 no. Project A gets like a third of the juice. Project B gets a third of the juice. And then you have another project of keeping those two projects going at the same time.
Yep.
Right. So you add another project, and it's not like, oh, you get it. No, that's not actually how this works. The more of those projects that expand and creep on you, the more of your capacity and bandwidth you have to spend to keep those projects spinning.
Mm.
And at a certain point, many entrepreneurs find that like I'm spending way too much. And I spend more time and bandwidth, time, energy, and attention is what I use in the book. I
Yeah.
spend more time of my time, energy, and attention just trying to figure out how to keep all of these plates spinning, but not actually spinning the plates. It's like, how am I going to like which one? Okay, I got to do this one, and I got to switch like and instead of pulling back in. And so it's really counterintuitive. I call it expansion by contraction. At a certain point, you need to subtract and contract to really have the growth that you need to. And that's whether we're talking about your business or whether we're talking about projects that get to the red zone that you mentioned. We're in football season right now, right? And so if you watch American football, you've seen plenty of times where people do all the work, teams do all the work to get down to, they're like 15, 20 yards out from the goal line. And then it gets tight and hard to do, and it just doesn't work. And they have to, at best, kick a field goal, right? As opposed to get those 6 points from the TD. Well, so many of us get our projects to that 75-80% mark. And then we start coasting, or we like, that's when we get scared because, that 80% mark for a lot of people is a scary mark because you see 20 more yards and you're like, great, I'm done. Right. Um, except for you also see you're going to have to show your work.
Books build brands, and We Help Authors helps authors. So if you have a book inside you and have always wanted to write one or thought about becoming an author, check them out. Everything from ghostwriting, helping you write, editing, formatting, publishing, promoting, they do it all. WeHelpAuthors.com.
And that's when scope creep comes in. That's when perfectionism creeps in. That's when that like fiddling starts to happen where you're like, no, I can't do the thing. Like I gotta, I'll tease about websites. This used to be a thing more than it is now, but you get the website and then like you can't go public with it because you got to get like that perfect font. And that
Yeah.
perfect font is something you spend 3 months working on. People are not gonna care.
Yeah.
Right. Or like, I can't launch the podcast. I gotta have the perfect podcast description. And I'm like, you're gonna change it in 6 months anyways.
Yeah.
Right. Is it good enough? Or whatever that thing is. And that's why we get stuck in that red zone, because it's not about procrastination as much. It's not about some of those. It's like, oh, that's that point where I need to show my work, where I could fail, and where I have confirmation that this idea that I had that seems so great, that seems like it's going to be the thing, is it actually going to work? Um, so we get into this counterintuitive cycle or this counterproductive cycle to where it's like we work on it longer to make sure that it works
Yeah.
and that it goes. But then because we spent so much time in it, now it's really got to work. So we really got to spend more time on it.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we spend more time on it. And it's like, oh, now I've been working on this 9 months. Like I can't just go out. And I'm
Yeah.
like, so you mean that like if you would have launched this in a month and it would have been crappy, you probably would have been at the same point at the 3 month mark that you are now, except for you had real data.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's where we get, it's like, oh, I put so much into it. So I got to make sure it's perfect. Oh, now I put so much into it. I got to make sure it's perfect. And then, especially if you're on like the conference, you know what I'm talking about. Like you
Yeah.
go to the annual conference and you're like, oh, well, last year I said I was going to do a thing. That's the worst.
Yeah. I forgot who said it, but it really helped me was that if you're not embarrassed by the first go round or whatever, you waited too long to launch it.
Reed Hoffman at LinkedIn.
Was that okay? Yeah, that
Yeah.
was really eye opener for me that um but I still do it. I still analysis paralysis, and um, wait way too long to launch. And you're right. The longer I wait, the harder it is. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
what
with
can be helpful
that.
here? I talk about building success packs and start finishing.
Yeah.
And there are four different kinds of people you put in your success pack, but I'm going to talk about the one that people, I'm going to talk about the two that people think, or sorry, I'm going to talk about two of them. One in which people think they have to have, they don't need it as much as they do. And the other one that people overlook, right? So the one that people think they have to have is what I call your guides. Those are those mentors, those people who know and they've done it. And like, if you get them to look at your project or be a part of your project, it's going to be like instant success. Like you're going to know all those things. So we spend a lot of time with our best projects trying to find those guides and trying to line them up. And if only Seth knew what I was going to do, or if only James knew what I was going to do, if only Charlie, like we try to build that dream team
Yep.
without remembering that we pull on guides, not because they're going to do like actual work for us, but they're going to help you change the way you see the world.
Yeah.
That's really their job, right? They don't call their friends, they don't send emails on your behalf, they don't do any of that. That's what your peers do. So we spend a lot of time chasing guides and trying to figure out how to get guides. But the people really, really need to pay most attention to are actually our beneficiaries. These are the people who benefit from us completing that
Yeah.
project. And it turns out that if you're stuck on a project and you're in that red zone and you don't know which way it can go, you have several options. The default option I think that people do is they get into, talking to Google, searching Google or getting into AI or just like coming up with 18 different ways to do something on their own. That's the hard way of doing it. Takes a long time, you're still probably not going to be right. There's a simpler way to do it, which is you actually show it to the people you're building it for. You can say, hey, does this work for you or not? Here's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds obvious every time I say it, right? But what do we actually do though?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, oh, I can't show them. But if I said, hey, Dave, like, I'm working on this next book. I really am working on the next book, but the next book is called Trust and Vision. Here's what it's about. Here's a core thing. I'm really writing it to help leaders cultivate trust and articulate the vision that they have for their company and their team, right? Because that's where people fall down all the time. I'm wondering X, Y, and Z about that. Are you interested or you're not interested? I'm not going to put you on the spot like that, Dave. But if Dave was someone I was building that for, I could say that and have a little provisional table of contents and share it with him and immediately know whether it's going to be good for Dave or not. ChatGPT can't tell me that,
Yeah.
right? My own ideas of what's obvious don't matter, right? Or don't that's obvious and valuable don't matter because I'm building this for Dave, right? If I wanted to write a book for me, I'd write a memoir or something. I don't know. But I say this time and time again because whether we're talking about it in the context of entrepreneurship or just your creative projects. Now, a beneficiary can be you because you're building your project for yourself. I find that many people, though, will not commit nearly as much if it's just for themselves. And they don't want to spend 3 to 6 months of their life building something just for them, right? So sometimes people will creep that in. I'm like, that's cool. But that means you don't need another beneficiary to do this. Um, you might want one, but you don't need one. It's not necessary. So um, I offer that because when you're in that red zone spot, when you're starting to see that you're starting to fiddle and push things along and things like that, having your success pack in place will help. But even if you don't build that entire six pack, just be thinking, who am I building this for? And do the courageous work of showing them the work. I mean, like,
Mm.
here's what it is. Here's what I think. Is it working? Is it not working? And trust their feedback, right? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, they're just being nice. Well, let them be nice. If enough of the people that you're building it for are nice and actually like it, okay, that's what you need, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily have to go find the hard asses that are going to tear it up, right? Um, and over time, it does get easier to share your work at the same time that it gets harder to share your work. It gets easier because you get into the discipline of collaborative co-creation or co-creation, which collaborative is redundant in that one. It can get harder because your platform gets bigger, your business gets bigger, your status gets greater. And so it can sometimes feel scarier to be accomplished and sharing earlier versions of your work because they're like, Charlie, like, haven't you written a lot of books before? Like, why are you showing me something that's not done? That's what you think. In reality, you're right, people are typically super excited about seeing early versions.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true. Yeah. That's some of my favorite books. I love getting the pre-release from authors. That's my favorite thing, and
Yeah. And how
uh
many times have you gotten an arc and been like, this is crappy? It's got typos and the page numbers are weird. And like, that's not,
yeah.
you're like, this is so cool. Like, I get to read it at this stage and I'd rather have it now.
Yep.
Right. And be a part of the process here. But we forget when it's our work for our people, they feel the same.
Yeah. Wow, that is so true. So true. Yeah. So what are some ways to get that courage? Because you're right. The further along we get, the more there is to risk. When we're young and there's no responsibility, like who cares if I fail? I'll just learn and fail again, and stuff. And then you get to that point where, maybe it's, hey, now I've got a wife to look out for. Now I've got a kid. Wow, I can't risk as much, or just your reputation or whatever. Like what are some ways you found that can kind of work to, you know, 1, 2, 3, go and just do it anyway?
Yeah. So, um, there are a few ways out of this cycle. So, one of the things that we typically do is automatically make things more high stakes than they need to be. Right. And we assume that the broad scale of our business or platform or what we're doing has to apply to everything. So, again, I'll go back to books because it's a lingua franca for so many of us. Like, what you're really talking about, no matter how many readers you have, no matter how big your platform is, like, you have 5 friendlies that you could send a book to, right? To get feedback on. And with those friendlies, it's actually not that high stake. You set up the expectation this is a beta thing, right? Or this is something that I'm trying. And so you're like, hey, Charlie, but what if I want to launch a new channel or a new platform or new whatever, right? Same basic thing. You can do like I'm saying this and I got to make it sure that I'm articulating that it's going to sound super obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that people actually like appreciate it. Starting a new channel, like I want to do the YouTube thing, man. I just want to like go and give it a shot, but I'm scared that like what if it doesn't work out and I spend all this time? It's like you could tell people from the beginning that it's a project that you're trying. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't work, you can stop. Again, obvious, but that's not what we think. Like, oh, I want to start a podcast. Well, by podcast, they mean like a serial show that runs weekly that you have to do forever. That's somehow where people go, right? And I'm like, you could just do 10 episodes, see if you like it.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then stop. But well, what will people think if I stop? They probably think you made a smart move that didn't work with you. If you explain to people like, I tried it, I thought it would be fun, it wasn't. So I went on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and I always sounds obvious when I say it, but what we do, the bigger we go, is like we don't get to experiment anymore. We don't get to try things anymore because somehow we've had to figure everything out before we do the damn thing. Right. Now, obviously, if it comes to real material losses, like, hey, I want to sell my house and start a business, like that is a little bit more high stakes, right? A lot more conversations that you might want to have on there. So
Yeah.
I would say, how do we actually um de-risk some of that, lower the full stakes, but still have you doing the brave work, right? Like I don't know why you had to sell your house to start a business. I don't know why I set that scenario up.
Yeah.
But but that's what we do sometimes, right?
Yeah.
I've worked with enough folks as either clients or students, and we do what I call creating the impossible scenario. Because we'll create some impossible scenario that we can't do to get us off the hook of being able to do what we can do. right? So you're like, look, for me to do that, I'd have to like quit my job and sell my house and, move to Portland. And we build all of these constraints in there that are essentially an easy way for us to opt out. Because like, I can't do that. Instead of saying like, "Mm, actually, what I'm going to do is make starting my business a small project that I'm going to spend at least 3 focus blocks a week. I will commit to 6 to 10 hours a week. But I'll also know that I'm not going to grow super fast. That's fine. But I can commit that $2,000 that I might have gone on this one trip, or I might have bought this one thing, or can cancel some subscriptions. And I'll commit that $2,000 in 6 months just to get some traction on this. Um, Obviously, change the numbers, change the scale of time, but that's a way of doing the thing, still doing the brave work, but not creating that impossible scenario that lets you back out. Because that's the thing. We tell ourselves that someday in the future, somewhere, there's going to be this ideal amount of time and money and all the stuff off the table that we'll finally be able to do that stuff, those best work projects that we've been meaning to get to for decades. Like once the kids are out of school, once mortgage is paid off, once like whatever your thing is, and like that's when you're going to do it. Um, as I mentioned earlier, time is incredibly short, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at the rate of technology, you look at how quickly things are changing, whatever idea you have right now may or may not be relevant 20 years from now, or 5 years from now, or AI is changing every 90 days. So who knows, right?
Yeah.
Um, the more we buy into that myth that someday later is when there'll be these idyllic conditions that I can get started, the more we defer our life to some unlikely scenario, right? So to answer your question, which is how you get more courage, change the scope, de-risk it, but still commit to showing your work, commit to actually shipping the work, right? Because that's at the end of the day, that's the hard part. When you ship your work, that's when you see. I'll keep to it at entrepreneur lens. That's when you see if your idea matches market demands and needs. You will not know that until you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The faster you can do that and figure out that there is that alignment, the better. So, um, getting used to shipping faster or finishing faster, and getting used to your product, your idea not working for some people and being okay with that, but really being able to pay attention to who it does work for. Sort of the keys to building up that muscle, because like someone listening might have heard me talk about the book that I'm working on now, and they're like, Charlie, I'm not really interested in team leadership stuff. Like, I just want to run my own solo thing. Great. That book was not for them. Doesn't mean it's not a book I shouldn't write, though.
Yeah.
Right. And find those people who it's for and build from there.
Yeah. Very good. Want to go back to chunking things down a little bit. And so like I know for a fact, like if you have I want to write a book on your to-do list, you're never ever going to write a book. You'll never
Right.
finish it. You have to say, I want to design a cover. I need to come up with a title. I need to map out the chapters. Like there's so many things. But if it's your first book, you don't know what any of those things are.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the book you talked about, there was some line about, there's if you're forging a new road, there's no path there to follow. Like, so how would you, like using the book example, how would you explain to somebody like how to chunk that down, that you can't have write a book or, become a published author on your to-do list. It's got to be segmented down into 100 different things. And then you start chunking down each one of those into a focus block. Like, so,
Yeah. So this is what I get to say now in 2024 that I was not able to say in 2019. Um, this is where things like ChatGPT and Claude come in super handily, right? Because you can literally go in and say, I want to write a book. What are the major steps involved into writing that book? And it will
yeah,
spit that out for you, right?
nice.
That's the easy, free, maybe not the best way, right, of doing it. But it is a way that's available for all of us because it's free as long as you have, you know, the baseline technology for that. So that would be how I would say that for most people. Um, if you if you want to and you have the means to and you know it's something that's going to make you more successful, like step 1 might be talk to someone who helps people write books. Right? That's the first step because like when you talk to them, it's like, hey, I don't know how to do all this stuff. Like, what are the steps? And then they'll tell you the steps, right? That you need to do. And then you can start to build that out. And you can do that for basically anything. So while your unique path may not have been trod before, other folks have trod a similar path, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I know it sounds obvious, but ask them, hey, like Charlie, thinking about writing a book. How long is this thing going to take? Right. And Charlie or whoever's going to say is, well, there's a lot of factors, but it's unlikely to be the weekend thing. Right. But it also doesn't have to take you 10 years. Right. So somewhere between, depending upon how much you focus, somewhere between 3 months and 15 months. Right. If you focus on it.
Yeah.
Okay. That gives you a sense of time. Right. Then what are steps involved? And so I think, um, at this stage with the tools that we have available to us through, you know, ChatGPT, AI, things like that, through, you know, search engines, I think most people unfortunately assume that they're what they want to do is so unique that they can't search for it, right? To figure out
Yeah.
what are the steps involved. And so, and I know that sounds obvious, but how to start a podcast, what are the steps involved in starting a podcast? You're going to get a ton of that. So unless you're, you know, building like a hyperspace fusion engine, someone has built something close to what you have built. And
Yeah.
there's at least enough of a blueprint there that you can follow along and sort of adapt to. And then the other part about it is I'm coming back to success pack. So I'm seeing how elliptical I am today. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the patience, everybody. When you look at your success pack, it's who you put on that team. So that's where your guides are super handy, actually, right?
Yeah.
Because you can ask them that question of like, "Hey, I want to do this thing," and like, you know, it's November the 6th, 2024, and I want to finish a book by the end of the year. Well, a decent guide is going to say like, you can probably finish a book, but if this is your first time, I don't know that it's going to be a good book, and I don't know that you're going to like your life while you're finishing that book.
Yeah.
Right? So really, what's that goal about? So um, use the resources available. AI is fantastic for that at this
Yeah.
point.
It's very good.
To recruit people and pull them on your success pack. 3, while you're talking about chunking, that's where I would go back to the time blocking thing. Every one of those chunks, you got to start thinking like it needs to live on my calendar somewhere. And the challenge that people have, Dave, is like we for you know, we have those sort of coffee shop or plane moments where you're like, you got this idea for a great new project. And you're like, okay, I'm going to practice this chunking thing and I'm going to chunk it down. And then you're going to look at those chunks and you're going to look at your schedule and be like, okay, I've got all this free time. I can just get it done in this period of time. And we forget that we've already committed to projects, actually. Like my baseline assumption when people come and ask me productivity questions is they're already over capacity. Like, because the type of people who show up for me, they're not sitting around at like 20% capacity just looking for things to do, right? They want to do more, but they're currently in a place where they're not able to do everything they already want to do, or that is required of them. And so the first thing, starts to get me into like the 5 projects rule and no more, which the long nerdy way of saying it, which only I say it, is no more than 5 active projects per time horizon. So to unpack that, start at the end per time horizon. We, most of us, can intuitively feel the difference between a month-sized project and a quarter-sized project. Just like we can feel the difference between a month-sized project and a week-sized project. Just like we can feel the difference between a week-sized project and something that's going to take about a 2-hour block of time. Okay. Um, outside of that, things get wonky. We're terrible at estimating, turns out. And so I hack that and say, like, if you're thinking about what you want to do this month, that fixes the time horizon. Okay. And I say no more than 5 active projects. These are things you're actually focusing your energy on. Think of those big rocks that, like, if you don't attend to them, are not going to happen. So no more than is the piece that people forget all the time. They just call it the 5 projects rule and they count to 5 and they think, okay, cool, I'm good. The no more than is important. Last thing that I'll say here is personal projects count as projects. So in a few weeks, many Americans are going to be having Thanksgiving, which means they're going to be inviting family or they're going to be doing that. Like at the week level, that's actually a week sized project, getting the turkey and doing all the things. And all the women listen to this know exactly what I'm talking about, right? That's a week long project. So for that week, you don't have 5 professional projects available to you. You have at most 4, right? And if you're the one traveling, you might actually only have 3 because traveling to get there and then doing it actually are 2 separate projects, right? And I say that because this is where people overstuff themselves. Like they fill, to your point that you said earlier, they fill their calendars full of professional or economic work and then try to squeeze in their life. I want us to invert that. Like if we have those important priorities, those require a block or those require a project slot. And then we get real about whether we're going to attend to those personal things or whether we're going to let those personal things be displaced by economic or professional things. There's not a one size fits all and one right way to do this. I just want people to be conscious of those choices. Um, so when we look at going back to 5 month size projects, since we know what a month size project feels like, we kind of know what's going on in a personal life. So we can kind of figure out if that's a month size or not. Then that lets us know how many month size economic projects we have, which are typically chunks of larger quarter size projects, right? Um, I add this on here because if you're in that coffee shop moment or you're in that airplane ride moment and you've got that new month size project that pops up, first off, it's probably a quarter size project and you're lying about it. Second off, it's not like you have an empty deck of projects or you have 5 full slides, you can just lay that mug in there. You actually need to decide whether you're going to complete a project that's currently on your deck, whether you're going to drop a project, whether like how you're going to manage that because this new project doesn't have a home, which means you're not going to do it, or you're going to end in that place where you're carrying like 17 projects. None of them are going forward because you actually don't have the capacity for them and you're not finishing them. So they're not going forward. So you
Yeah.
end up in this loop to where you, at a certain point, you get to what I call creatively constipated, to just like physical constipation. Like you've taken in all of these ideas and all of this inspiration and none of it is moving. And just like physical constipation, it turns toxic, right? At a certain point, you'll not, you'll start tearing things up. And what you'll tear up first, it's probably yourself, right? I just can't commit. I need to focus. I just can't get right. Like I always do this. Like, why is this about bright, shiny objects? It just make me fall down, or like I'm making bad commitments to myself again. Like you'll start assassinating your own character. When again, it's a math problem.
Yeah, that was one of the quotes that I really loved was, you said, "Remember, creative people will either be actively creating something or actively destroying something, and the object of their destruction, that is usually the easiest target, is themselves." It's like, wow, that's true. So I've got kind of a silly thing, but kind of true also. I call it the rule of tens, is that I assume that any project is going to take 10 times longer, cost 10 times more, and be 10 times harder than I think going into it. And that way, when it's only twice as hard or 3 times as hard or and it's costly and timely, I'm excited that I really raced it. But nothing is ever, I think it'll take this. It never ever will, you know?
Yeah, I don't use 10x, but I do use 3x,
Yeah.
right? When
That's
people
probably
are like,
more
oh,
accurate, but
right. It's like there's this new thing. So they're like, hey Charlie, there's this new thing. I haven't done it before. I'm really excited about it. I think it's gonna take me a month, automatically a quarter,
yeah,
right? At
yeah,
least a quarter, right?
right.
And they're like, well, here's what I think the budget's gonna be, automatically gonna start adding to that.
Yeah,
Because well, and I might not automatically add to the budget because it might be like, I'm gonna go do this thing and it's gonna cost that much. Like we're actually better about estimating costs
Okay.
right? When we're buying equipment and things like that, like
Yeah.
those aren't nearly as bad. We're terrible about estimating the cost of labor, though. That's a whole other matter, right? Well, the reason we're terrible about estimating the cost of labor is because we're terrible about estimating how long it takes to do things.
Mhm.
And when you get a bunch of people and or yourself involved in doing things, basically the unit becomes how long is it taking humans to do that? And the longer it takes them, the more expensive it is. So if you think it's going to take 1x and we know that your time estimations are off and it takes 3x, that means your labor costs are going to be 3x. So
Yeah.
equipment costs, I tend to be less stringent on when we're talking about like, I'm going to hire a team and we're going to do this and it's going to take us a month. I'm like, let's plan for that to be the ideal scenario. I'm not going to say it's not possible. I've learned not to tell creative peoples what's not possible, right? Because they will
Also
figure
true.
it out just to prove me
Yeah.
wrong, right?
Good.
But I'll say, like, okay, let's make that the ideal case. Let's build out a more plausible case or a more realistic case. And you know what? If you still can commit to the realistic case and you get the ideal case, fantastic, to your point, right?
Mm.
But if it turns out to be the more plausible case, like you don't get to beat yourself up because we said this was the baseline, this was the realistic model. And if you do that, now if we do the realistic model and then it's another 3x to 10x the amount of time, well, we had some serious misalignments, right? Was it just that our timeline and how long we thought it would take to do were correct, but your level of commitment over time did not match that? Okay, that's different, right? Than like the plan. Well, we made a bad plan. No, we didn't make a bad plan. The plan was good. Your commitment to it is what we need to work on. And let's talk about why that is. Right. And I know that sounds more shamey than I mean for it to be, but it's like, no, it's like there's a certain amount of focus blocks reps that this was going to take. You did not put in those focus blocks reps. You therefore did not get those outcomes. So if we want to adjust something, let's talk about what we need to do to help you prioritize those focus blocks. What ate those focus blocks? What happened there? And then we get back to the math problem. But yeah, absolutely. Um, whether it's a 10x rule, the 3x rule, if someone starts saying it's new, haven't done it before, or got this new strategic project, I'm automatically going to start adding time to it because what you're already saying is, I don't know how to do this thing. And I'm excited about it, but I don't know how to do this thing. Well, if you don't know how to do this thing, why would we believe that your estimate about how long it takes to do that thing is accurate? Um, and that sounds harsher than I mean for it to be, but it's just like you've already told me you don't know how to do it, you know? Um,
You don't know what you don't know. And
you don't know what you don't know. Um, Also from my side, doing this since 2007, I've seen a lot of projects go. A lot. I've got a lot of reps and seeing what makes them work and what doesn't make them work. So not that I'm smarter than everyone. It's just like I've failed on more projects and seen clients and students fail on more projects. And I can tell you most of these projects take about that long,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Once you've done it, even if you've done it once, you know, 100 times more than when you've done it 0 times, obviously.
Correct.
So
Correct. And I remind myself, see, because I write, I have this bad problem of writing books. Um, and every time I tell myself, okay, it's not going to be as long and as hard as it was last time. And then I write it and get into the process and realize actually it's about the same. Because especially with the how long it takes to write and publish books in the traditional model, like you got a new team, you got a new publishing team. Um, you're probably writing for a slightly different market on a slightly different thing that you didn't write about before, or otherwise you would have written about before.
yeah.
And you're launching the book into a new marketing landscape because the marketing landscape changes every 3 to 5 years. So, what it would have taken for me to be successful with my books in the early 2010s is different than what it's going to take for me to be successful with a book in the mid 2020s. So, yes, I am going to have to learn this all over again.
One of the things I really want to commend you on this start finishing is it is so evergreen.
Thank you.
This is going to be just as a good a read 50 years from now as it is now. Human nature doesn't change, and the things we're struggling with doesn't change, and you address them so well.
Thank
So,
you. I wrote why I was so excited to see all of your dog ears and your notes and things like that is because I wrote Start Finishing for it to be that way. When I was talking to my publishing team, I was like, the soul of this book is closer to a book than it is a standard read. Like, and it needs to be designed that way. Like, I want it to be easy to find stuff and go through that. And I want people to write in it. I want people to have space to do things. I want it to be an interactive project that either lives on their bookshelf or jumps from their bookshelf to their desk, to the bookshelf, to the desk, to the backpack, but it travels and lives with them. So every time I see a copy of Start Finishing that's that way, I'm like, yes, that's
yep.
exactly what it wanted to be.
Yeah, and I showed you I have the audiobook. It frustrates me almost that people are like, "Oh, should I get the audiobook or get the physical book?" And I'm like, "Get both." You know, we all start off as kids loving reading time that, our parents or somebody that loves puts us on their lap. We get to pick out the book and we listen to them as we're following along and stuff. And then school ruins all that and makes us hate books. And so to me, like there's no better way I can sit there listening to the author read the book to me while I'm highlighting and taking notes. And yeah, there's a lot of pausing and backing up and stuff like that a lot of times. But again, this is more of a course than, if somebody just listens to it while they're out on a bike ride or something, they're going to get a tenth of the value out of it as if they actually interact with the book and
Yeah.
really take notes and apply it. And it's beautiful. And I'll leave everybody with a little cliffhanger of 212 alone is worth 100 times the cost of the book. So get the book and read 212.
I think
So
I know what
we're not going to
212
tell them
is,
what's
but
on there, but
um,
so,
yep.
yep.
um, that one's worth it. And there's another
There's
one
so many
that's
of them, so many of
yeah.
them. So it really
Um,
had an impact on my life and continues to. And so thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the show and chatting with me. This has been awesome.
all right, Dave, thanks so much for having me. And for listeners, like if you wanted to take a one things, one, I would love for you to pick up the book. But more importantly, make some time for that soul deep idea that's just in there that wants to come out. Give it some time on your schedule. You will feel better once you do some of the thrashing to have it out there in the world than just sitting in your soul. So please do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And one of my other things I was going to ask you about was that you had a line about your dad and all the cars and the acre of things of how much of his soul is tied up in the things he'll never get to. And to me, that was a wow, hit me in the heart and really awakened me that, yeah, like you said, life's short and um, we need to, look, what do we actually want to accomplish versus what are we just getting done? So
Yeah, precisely.
very,
I'm
very,
glad you said that. Dad actually passed 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago,
all
2022.
right.
And
Okay.
so when I read Start Finishing, because so much of it is about mom and dad, but that
Yeah.
that is a piece where, like, seeing how to your point, like I'll give a shout out to my colleague Todd Henry, that I think has the book Die Empty.
Mm.
Um, it's hiding from me on my shelf, but like, let's die empty when it comes to those soul deep ideas.
Yeah. That's so good. I'm gonna have to read that one. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah,
So yeah, I lost my dad in 2021 and so sorry about that. And yeah, it kind of changes us.
it does in the best of ways and sometimes in the worst of ways.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, again, thank you so much for coming on. Is there something I didn't ask you that I should have?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Okay. And I can't wait to dig into team habits. And it's funny, at first I was like, oh, that's not for me because I don't really have a team. And then I realized, oh, I do have a team. Like I use a lot of sublets and a lot of different teams and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to dig into that one. And I'll be reaching out when I'm done.
I appreciate it. Well, you'll see the link. So one of the gaps in the air sandwich is poor team alignment.
Yeah. We have to tell
So,
'em what the air sandwich is. I'm sorry. I'm
okay. All right. So the
so
air
good.
sandwich. So think about your life and think about the top layer of the bread being your vision, your values, your sort of big idea for yourself, right? And how you see your life being. On the bottom, you have your day-to-day reality, your schedule and your routines, right? For a lot of people, there seems to be a lot of air between those two, which is why we call it the air sandwich. It's just a big disconnect. Um, but that's actually an illusion because there are five core challenges that go in there. So you've got um, head trash, which is just all the stories you tell yourself about what you can and can't do. You've got competing priorities. You have too few resources, no realistic plan. All three of those words are important, and poor team alignment. Okay. So usually when people come to me, and they're like, I'm not getting to something, so on and so forth. One of the first things, if it's not a math problem, most times it's a math problem, right? But we use some of the stuff in the air sandwich to figure out what's going on. It's like, oh, the reason we have a math problem is it's a combination of competing priorities and head trash, meaning you're you want to do this thing, but you want to do this other thing. And so you divide yourself and you don't have the time for it. Or you're hedging bets and you're doing three or four different things because any one of them might not work and you're not wanting to commit to one thing that might fail, right? And so the head trash is like whatever that thing is, it's not going to work, so I need to hedge my bets. But then you actually make it more likely that none of those things work
Yeah.
because you hedged your bets, right? And so usually what I start finding out is what's the single or the combination that's creating the stuckness there. And so yeah, that's the air sandwich. It's just a model. And sometimes like especially when it comes to poor team alignment, when I talk about teams and team habits, I mostly talk about professional teams. Everything in team habits applies to families, churches, communities just as well.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of times on the poor team alignment side, and we assemble to your point some of those support teammates and helpers and partners, but we don't actually tell them what we want and what we're trying to do. We just ask them to help us in different ways. And then because we haven't really told them what we wanted, or we told them what we thought was acceptable to want, but not really what we wanted. So when we don't tell them the truth about where we're going, we automatically get poor team alignment. And you get to that place. And I know many women, especially, get to this place where it's like, I just like no one is helping me with this. I'm all by myself and I can't get anywhere. And just like everybody's in my way and it's not helpful. So a lot of times I'm like, but did you actually tell them where they were, like what you really wanted and needed? Or did you tell them some things that you were working on and invited them to help you? Because those are different conversations. So when I wrote Start Finishing, I knew it was book one of at least a 3-book arc. Book one was about personal productivity. How do you do your best work? How do I do my best work?
Mhm.
I knew the next one in the arc was, at the time, the project name of it was Start Finishing Together, because it's like, how do we do this together?
Okay.
That became Team Habits,
Gotcha.
because that's how we do it together.
Yeah. Cool.
Right. And then I knew the third one was for leaders, what leaders need to do. And more importantly, what they need to stop doing so that their teams and the people on those teams could do their best work. So I already knew that arc was there.
Nice.
And so the arc of books follows that right now. So team habits, sort of, if you read throughout the book, when we're talking about boundaries, when we're talking about poor team alignment, we're talking about all of that. It's addressing the people elements in our lives, even success packs. That's about people, right? Um, but I knew that I was writing the book for a lot of creatives and creators who tend to focus on their own work and not be that interested in the team side of things. It's like I didn't leave corporate just to work with more people, right? I
Yeah.
left corporate so I can go do my own thing. And then they realized doing your own thing is actually impossible. You need other people around you to be successful with it. Um,
Yeah.
so there's that bookend of poor team alignment and all the people stuff that's in start finishing that's picked up in team habits. And you might suspect that there are things in team habits that will be picked up in the next book. But the next book is not going to be a full size book. There's probably going to be 3 or 4 smaller ones.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Awesome. Can't wait to read them all. So,
Thanks. Well, I know we're well over time, so if listeners, if you're still with us, I appreciate that.
yep.
But Dave, I appreciate you too.
Oh, thank you so much, Charlie. And thanks everybody for listening. I really appreciate you coming on here and again, changing my life. Great.
Glad to hear that. Take care.
Books build brands, and We Help Authors helps authors. So if you have a book inside you and have always wanted to write one or thought about becoming an author, check them out. Everything from ghostwriting, helping you write, editing, formatting, publishing, promoting, they do it all. WeHelpAuthors.com.